In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a scream shatters. The door nurse Evelyn Carter is found strangled in her infirmary office, her own scarf the weapon. Miss Jane Marple, with her keen eyes and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of secrets. A nervous patient hiding a fraudulent past, a doctor guarding his reputation, a timid aide clutching a damning notebook, and a sister with a shadowed motive. As clues pile like autumn leaves crumpled charts, missing keys and whispered lies. Miss Marple stitches the truth together, revealing a killer driven by desperation. Will justice prevail in this cozy village where no secret stays buried? Chapter 1. The Infirmary at dawn. The village of St. Mary Mead lay cloaked in the soft grey mist of an autumn morning. Its thatched cottages and neat hedgerows bathed in a stillness that seemed almost reverent. The air carried the faint scent of damp leaves and wood smoke, and the only sound was the occasional trill of a thrush from the vicarage garden. At Lilac Cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her nimble fingers guiding a pair of knitting needles through a skein of pale blue wool. Her sharp eyes, undimmed by age, flickered occasionally to the lane outside, where the daily rhythm of the village unfolded with predictable precision. It was just past 7 when the tranquility shattered. A piercing scream, raw and desperate, cut through the morning calm, emanating from the direction of the infirmary, a modest red brick building perched at the edge of town, its whitewashed walls a beacon of care for the ailing. Miss Marple's needles paused, her head tilting slightly, as she registered the sound. Screams were not unknown in St. Mary Mead, but this one carried a note of terror that set it apart from the usual domestic squabbles or childish mishaps. She set her knitting aside, her mind already stirring with curiosity. By 9 o'clock, the village was abuzz with the grim news, carried from door to door by breathless messengers. Nurse Evelyn Carter, the infirmary's steadfast matron, had been found dead in her office, her life snuffed out in a manner most foul. Strangled, they said, with her own scarf, a pale green silk one, a gift from a grateful patient. The horror of it sent ripples through St. Mary Mead, for Evelyn Carter was no ordinary woman. Efficient, kind, and fiercely dedicated, she had tended to the village's ailments for nearly a decade, her calm competence a comfort to all who could wish her harm. Miss Marple, sipping her morning tea in the parlour, listened as her maid, Cherry, relayed the details with wide-eyed fervour. Found by young Clara Dunn, her aide, just after dawn, Cherry said, clutching a duster. Poor girls, in a state, they say. And the police are there, now Inspector Crane, from Much Benham, poking about. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her thoughts racing. She knew the infirmary well, having visited often to deliver jams or sit with recovering friends. It was a small place, with 2 wards, a surgery, and Evelyn's officer room of crisp order, its shelves lined with medical books and patient files. The idea of violence in such a setting was jarring, yet Miss Marple knew that human nature, even in the quietest corners, could harbour darkness. A scarf, she murmured, stirring her tea. Such a personal thing to use. Cherry, eager to share more, continued. They say 4 people were there last night, Mr. Grayson, that patient with the funny nerves, Dr. Price, the head doctor, Clara, of course, and oh, you'll never guess Sevelin's sister, Mrs. Ward, come all the way from London. Folks say she and Evelyn hadn't spoken in years. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with interest. For suspects, each with access to the infirmary, each with a potential thread of motive waiting to be unravelled. Harold Grayson, she recalled, was a newcomer to the village. Admitted for a vague ailment that had tongues wagging. Dr. Leonard Price, a man of stern professionalism, was respected but not universally liked. Clara Dunn, timid and earnest, seemed an unlikely killer, yet Miss Marple knew better than to dismiss the quiet ones. And Lillian Ward's estranged sisters often carried old wounds, festering beneath polite surfaces. Rising from her chair, Miss Marple adjusted her shawl and glanced out the window. The infirmary was just visible through the trees, its chimneys puffing faint smoke. "I think," she said, almost to herself, "I shall take a walk. The vicar's wife may need help comforting the staff." Cherry blinked. "You're not thinking of meddling, are you, miss?" Miss Marple smiled, a twinkle in her eye. "Meddling, Cherry? I merely observe. People, you see, are so very like my knitting pull. One thread, and the pattern begins to show." As she stepped into the crisp morning, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path, Miss Marple's mind was already at work, sorting the scraps of gossip and fact into a tapestry of possibilities. Murder in St. Mary Mead was rare, but not unheard of, and if there was one thing Miss Marple knew, it was that secrets, like loose stitches, had a way of coming undone. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime. The infirmary at St. Mary Mead stood under a sky bruised with low-hanging clouds, its red brick facade looking forlorn in the wake of tragedy. By mid-morning, a small crowd of villagers had gathered at a respectful distance, their murmurs blending with the rustle of leaves skittering across the gravel path. Miss Jane Marple, her black lace mittens tucked neatly into her handbag, approached the building with the measured step of one accustomed to observing without being observed. She had been invited by Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, to offer solace to the infirmary staff. A pretext Miss Marple accepted with her usual quiet acquiescence, knowing it would grant her access to the heart of the matter. Inside, the infirmary was a study in controlled chaos. Constable Red, a young man with an earnest face and a notebook clutched like a talisman, stood guard at the entrance to Nurse Evelyn Carter's office. The air carried the sharp tang of antiseptic, overlaid with something heavier, fear, perhaps, or the weight of sudden death. Miss Marple paused in the corridor, her eyes taking in the polished linoleum floor, the notice board pinned with schedules, and the faint scuff marks near the office door. A busy place, she thought, yet so vulnerable to secrets. Inspector Crane, a stocky man with a bristling mustache and a manner that suggested he trusted facts over fancies, emerged from the office, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. He spotted Miss Marple and gave a curt nod, accustomed to her presence at such scenes. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Mrs. Clements in the staff room with Clara Dunn. Dreadful business, this." "Quite dreadful," Miss Marple agreed, her tone soft but her gaze sharp. "Might I have a word with you later, Inspector? I shan't intrude now." Crane grunted, clearly preoccupied, and waved her toward the staff room before turning back to his work. Miss Marple, however, lingered a moment longer, her eyes drifting to the office door, which stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, she glimpsed the scene within, a small, orderly room, its desk cluttered with papers, a single chair overturned, and the chilling sight of Nurse Carter's scarf, still knotted in a cruel embrace around her throat. The window behind the desk was open, admitting a chill breeze that stirred the curtains. Miss Marple's lips pursed. No forced entry, she murmured to herself. So it was someone she knew or someone already inside. She made her way to the staff room, where Mrs. Clement, a plump woman with a knack for soothing nerves, was pouring tea for Clara Dunn. The young aide sat hunched, her hands twisting a damp handkerchief, her face pale as the porcelain cup before her. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her feet, and offered Clara a gentle smile. "You've had a terrible shock, my dear," she said. "It's a mercy you weren't alone when you found her." Clara's eyes flicked up, red-rimmed and wary. I was just coming in for my shift," she stammered. "The door was open, and there she was. Oh, it was awful." Her voice broke, and Mrs. Clement patted her hand. There, Mrs. Clement said. "You mustn't dwell on it. Miss Marple, perhaps you could fetch Clara's coat. It's in the cloakroom." Miss Marple rose obligingly, but her detour to the cloakroom took her past the office once more. Constable Red, distracted by a villager's question, did not notice her pause. She peered inside, her keen eyes cataloguing details. The desk bore a cup of tea, stone cold, with a faint ring of condensation beneath it. A patient chart lay open, its pages slightly crumpled, as if handled in haste. A smudge of ink marred the floor near the desk, barely noticeable but stark against the clean linoleum. Most intriguing was the medicine cabinet against the wall, its glass door locked, but the key usually kept on a chain by Nurse Carter was nowhere in sight. Curious, Miss Marple thought, filing the observation away, returning with Clara's coat. She rejoined the women in the staff room. Clara was calmer now, sipping her tea, though her hands still trembled. Miss Marple, knitting needles clicking softly, steered the conversation gently. "You worked closely with Nurse Carter, didn't you, Clara? She must have been a remarkable woman, so precise in her duties." Clara nodded, her eyes downcast. She was always checking everything, charts, medicines, even the logbook. She didn't miss a thing. "Such diligence," Miss Marple said, her tone admiring. "I suppose she kept the office in perfect order. No papers out of place, no keys mislaid." Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on her cup. "Mostly. But last night, she seemed worried, kept looking at a chart, muttering about mistakes." Miss Marple's needles paused, but her expression remained serene. "Mistakes? In the records, perhaps?" "I don't know," Clara said quickly. "I didn't hear much. I was cleaning the wards till late." Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple noted the flicker of unease in her eyes. She did not press further, instead offering a comforting pat on the arm before excusing herself to stretch her legs. Outside the staff room, she encountered Inspector Crane, who was now questioning the suspects in the surgery, a larger room with a high ceiling and rows of medical supplies. Miss Marple, under the guise of adjusting her shawl, lingered near the open door, her ears attuned to the voices within. Crane's questions were methodical, his notebook open, but his tone betrayed a man grappling with too many threads. First was Harold Grayson, the patient, a gaunt man in his early 40s with a sallow complexion and restless hands. He sat stiffly, his hospital gown replaced by a rumpled suit, as if he'd dressed in haste. "I was in my ward all night," he said, his voice thin but defiant. "Asleep, mostly. I heard nothing, no screams, no footsteps. I'm not well, Inspector. I don't wander about." Crane frowned, flipping a page in his notebook. "You were the only patient in the men's ward, Mr. Grayson. No one to confirm your story. And Nurse Carter was checking your chart last night, wasn't she?" Grayson's jaw tightened, but he shrugged. "She checked everyone's. That was her job." Miss Marple, hovering near a cabinet of bandages, noted the faint tremor in Grayson's hands and the way his eyes darted to the door. A nervous man, she thought, But is it illness or guilt? She recalled village gossip about Grayson's sudden arrival 2 months ago, his ailment vaguely described as nerves. A man with no roots in St. Mary Mead was a man worth watching. Next came Dr. Leonard Price, the head physician, a tall figure with a clipped beard and an air of impatience. His white coat was immaculate, but his eyes were shadowed, as if sleep had eluded him. "I was in my office upstairs," he said, his voice crisp, "reviewing patient notes until 11. Then I locked up and went home. I saw Evelyn at 9 when she brought me a report. She was perfectly fine. You didn't hear anything unusual?" Crane pressed. "No voices, no commotion." Price's lips thinned. "The infirmary is old, Inspector. It creaks and groans. I heard nothing out of the ordinary." Miss Marple, adjusting her spectacles, observed Price's rigid posture and the way his fingers drummed against his thigh. He was a man of authority, accustomed to control, yet something in his manner suggested unease. She remembered a conversation with the vicar about Price's insistence on overseeing all prescriptions himself. Habit nurse Carter had reportedly questioned. A clash of wills, Miss Marple mused, can be a dangerous thing. Clara Dunn was summoned next, her steps hesitant as she entered the surgery. Her voice was barely audible, and Crane had to lean forward to catch her words. "I was cleaning the wards until midnight," she said, twisting her handkerchief. "I saw Evelyn in her office at 10, going over papers. I didn't disturb her. When I left, the place was quiet." "You didn't see anyone else?" Crane asked. "No visitors, no one lingering?" Clara shook her head, but her eyes flickered to the floor. "No, sir. Just Evelyn." Miss Marple, pretending to examine a jar of cotton swabs, noted Clara's hesitation. The girl was hiding something, though whether from fear or complicity was unclear. Miss Marple thought of Clara's earlier mention of mistakes in the records. Had she seen more than she admitted? And that notebook she clutched so tightly, might it hold a clue? Finally, Lillian Ward, Nurse Carter's sister, was called. She entered with the poise of a woman accustomed to scrutiny, her dark coat and hat lending her an air of sombre elegance. Her resemblance to Evelyn was striking, same high cheekbones, same steady gaze, but where Evelyn had been warm, Lillian was cool, almost detached. "I came to see Evelyn last night," she said, her voice low. "We hadn't spoken in years, but I was passing through. We talked in her office about old times, mostly. It wasn't a long visit. I left by 10. Crane raised an eyebrow. "Witnesses say you argued. Care to explain?" Lillian's eyes narrowed, but she answered calmly. "It was a family matter, Inspector. Sisters disagree. It was nothing serious. I went back to the inn afterward." Miss Marple, now rearranging her scarf, caught the faint tightening of Lillian's lips. The innkeeper had mentioned Lillian's late return, her coat damp from rain. Had she truly left at 10, or had she lingered, perhaps overhearing something or doing something? Miss Marple thought of old quarrels, the kind that festered over years, and wondered what had brought Lillian to St. Mary Mead after so long. As the interviews concluded, Crane dismissed the suspects, instructing them to remain in the village. Miss Marple, sensing her moment, approached him with a diffident smile. "Inspector, might I trouble you for a small observation? The office such a tidy place, yet that overturned chair and the open window. It's almost as if the scene were staged, don't you think?" Crane blinked, caught off guard. "Staged? You mean to suggest, oh, nothing so definite," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "But I did notice a smudge of ink on the floor, and the patient chart Mr. Grayson's, I believe, was rather crumpled. And the missing key to the medicine cabinet. Well, it's odd, isn't it? Crane's mustache twitched, but he jotted a note. I'll look into it, Miss Marple, though I warn you, this isn't one of your village puzzles. It's a murder, plain and simple. Of course, Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. But even simple things have their patterns, don't they? She left the infirmary, her mind a whirl of impressions. The crumpled chart, the ink smudge. The missing key all pointed to a struggle, not just of violence, but of secrets. Grayson's nervousness, Price's defensiveness, Clara's reticence. Lillian's composure, each was a thread in a tapestry yet to be woven. As she walked back to Lilac Cottage, the wind tugging at her shawl, Miss Marple thought of a case years ago when a stolen key had unlocked more than a cabinet. People, she said to herself, are so careless with what they hide. Back at home, she settled by the fire, her knitting resumed, but her thoughts far from the wool. The infirmary, with its locked doors and silent corridors, held the truth, and Miss Marple was determined to find it. She would watch and listen and wait for, in St. Mary Mead, as in life, the smallest details could unravel the greatest crimes. Chapter 3. The Patient's Secret. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across St. Mary Mead, gilding the cobblestone lanes and softening the stark outline of the infirmary, which now stood under the watchful eye of Constable Reed. Miss Jane Marple, having returned to Lilac Cottage for a light lunch of scones and tea, sat in her parlour, her knitting needles idle in her lap. Her mind, however, was far from idle, turning over the morning's observations like a gardener inspecting soil for hidden roots. The crumpled chart, the ink smudge, the missing key all pointed to a truth buried in the infirmary's orderly facade. But it was Harold Grayson, the nervous patient with his shifty eyes and vague ailment, who occupied her thoughts most keenly. Miss Marple knew that strangers in St. Mary Mead were rare, and those who arrived under mysterious circumstances rarer still. Grayson, with his pale face and evasive manner, was an enigma, and enigmas, in her experience, often concealed motives. She recalled his trembling hands during Inspector Crane's questioning, the way he'd avoided mention of his chart, and Clara's fleeting remark about Nurse Carter's concern over mistakes. Could Grayson's medical records hold the key to Evelyn's death? And if so, what secret was worth killing to protect? Rising from her chair, Miss Marple donned her coat and hat, resolving to pay a visit to Mr. Hodge, the village chemist, whose shop on High Street was a hub of quiet confidences. The walk was brisk, the air sharp with the scent of fallen apples from the orchard nearby. As she passed the post office, she noted Mrs. Cleary, the postmistress, gossiping with a neighbour, her voice carrying the latest speculations about the murder. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Gossip, properly sifted, could be as revealing as a fingerprint. Mr. Hodge's chemist shop was a small cluttered space, its shelves lined with bottles of tonic, powders, and neatly labelled jars. The bell above the door jingled as Miss Marple entered, and Mr. Hodge, a wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. "Miss Marple," he said, his tone warm, but tinged with the weariness of a man who'd answered too many questions that day. "Come about the infirmary business, I suppose." "Not precisely," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle, "though I confess I'm curious about poor Nurse Carter's patients. Mr. Grayson, for instance, he's been under her care for some weeks, hasn't he?" Mr. Hodge nodded, wiping his hands on his apron. "Aye, since August. A queer case, that one. Came in with a letter from a London doctor, claiming a nervous condition, palpitations, insomnia, the lot. Nurse Carter had me fill some odd prescriptions. For him sedatives, yes, but also a stimulant and a heart drug. Digoxin, I think it was. Struck me as peculiar for a man of his age, but I'm no physician. Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained placid. Peculiar, indeed. And these prescriptions, were they regular? Regular enough, Mr. Hodge said, frowning. Though Nurse Carter asked me last week if I'd ever had to adjust the doses. Said she was double-checking his file, as there'd been some confusion. I told her everything was as ordered, but she seemed troubled. Troubled, Miss Marple echoed, her mind latching on to the word. Did she say anything else? Mr. Hodge shook his head. Not much. Only that she'd have to speak to Dr. Price about it. I reckon she did, for I saw them talking in the infirmary yard a few days back. Looked like a proper disagreement, though I couldn't hear the words. Miss Marple thanked him, purchasing a small tin of lavender salts as a pretext for her visit, and stepped back into the street. The chemist's information was a thread, delicate but promising. Digoxin for a young man, sedatives and stimulants in tandem, and Evelyn's unease about the records it suggested a discrepancy, perhaps deliberate. She thought of a case in her youth when a man in a neighbouring village had feigned illness to secure a pension, only to be undone by a meticulous doctor. Could Grayson be playing a similar game? And had Evelyn's diligence threatened to expose him? Her next stop was the infirmary itself, where she hoped to observe Grayson more closely, under the guise of delivering a basket of apples for the staffer. Gift from her garden, she entered the building, nodding to Constable Reed, who was now stationed in the corridor. The infirmary was quieter now, the initial flurry of investigation giving way to a sombre hush. The door to the men's ward, where Grayson was housed, was ajar, and Miss Marple, moving with the unobtrusive grace of a shadow, positioned herself to listen. Inside, Grayson was restless. She heard the creak of his bed as he shifted, followed by a low mutter, barely audible. The records. If they find out, it's all over. A pause, then a sharper tone, as if addressing an unseen listener. No one can know, not now. His voice trembled, not with grief, but with fear, and Miss Marple's lips pursed. A man afraid, she thought, is a man with something to lose. She knocked softly, entering with her basket and a disarming smile. Mr. Grayson, she said, her tone warm. I thought a few apples might cheer you. Such a dreadful day for everyone. Grayson, propped against his pillows, started at her entrance, his eyes narrowing before he forced a weak smile. Kind of you, Miss Marple, is it? I'm not much for fruit just now. Of course, Miss Marple said, setting the basket on a side table. You must be terribly shaken, being so close to poor Nurse Carter's office last night. It's a wonder you slept at all. His hands, clutching the blanket, tightened. I slept soundly, he said, too quickly. Didn't hear a thing. My condition, you sit, exhausts me. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to his bedside table, where a glass of water and a small vial of pills sat. The vial's label was turned away, but she noted the faint tremble in Grayson's fingers as he reached for the glass. Such a pity, she said. Nurse Carter was so attentive, always checking charts, I hear, to ensure no mistakes. A comfort. For patients like yourself. Grayson's gaze flicked to her, sharp and wary, but he said nothing, only sipped his water. Miss Marple, sensing his guard was up, changed tack. I shan't keep you, she said. Rest is the best medicine. My mother always said. She left the ward, but not before noting a crumpled piece of paper tucked beneath his pillow, its edge just visible. A letter, perhaps, or a note. She filed the observation away, knowing better than to overstep yet. Outside, she lingered in the corridor, ostensibly adjusting her scarf, when Dr. Price emerged from his upstairs office, his face set in a scowl. He barely acknowledged her, striding toward the surgery. But Miss Marple caught the faint jingle of keys in his pocket, a sound that brought the missing medicine cabinet key to mind. She made a mental note to inquire further about Price's habits, perhaps through the vicar, who often dined with the doctor as she walked home. The village settling into the golden hush of late afternoon, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to Grayson, his muttering about records, his nervous demeanour, and the chemist's account of his prescriptions painted a picture of a man hiding something, perhaps a fabricated illness, or a condition he wished to conceal. She recalled a conversation with her nephew Raymond about insurance frauds in London, where men faked ailments for payouts. Could Grayson be such a man? And had Evelyn, with her meticulous nature, uncovered his deception back at Lilac Cottage? Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resumed, but her mind far from the wool. She thought of Grayson's ward, so close to Evelyn's office, and the ease with which he could have slipped out unnoticed. The crumpled paper under his pillow nagged at her. Could it be a clue to his secret? And what of the ink smudge in the office, so like the stains she'd seen on the hands of men who wrote in haste? A secret worth killing for, she murmured, her needles clicking softly. But secrets, like shadows, cannot hide forever. She resolved to watch Grayson closely, perhaps enlisting the vicar's wife to visit the infirmary again, instead Mary Mead, where every glance and whisper held meaning. Miss Marple knew the truth was near, waiting for the right thread to be pulled. Chapter 4. The doctor's disdain the following morning. St. Mary Mead awoke to a sky heavy with the promise of rain, its grey pallor casting a sombre light over the village. Miss Jane Marple, ever an early riser, sat at her breakfast table with a cup of Darjeeling and a slice of toast, her eyes scanning the morning's post. A letter from her nephew Raymond, full of London gossip, lay open, but her thoughts were elsewhere, tethered to the infirmary and the puzzle of Nurse Evelyn Carter's murder. Harold Grayson's nervous mutterings and dubious prescriptions had piqued her curiosity, but now her mind turned to Dr. Leonard Price, the infirmary's head physician, whose brusque demeanour and jingling keys had left an impression as distinct as footprints in damp earth. Dr. Price was a man of standing in St. Mary Mead, his medical expertise unquestioned. Yet Miss Marple had long observed that authority could mask flaws as easily as it commanded respect. His impatience during Inspector Crane's questioning, the faint unease in his shadowed eyes, and the village whispers of his clashes with Nurse Carter suggested a man with more to hide than professional pride. The jingle of keys in his pocket, so at odds with the missing medicine cabinet key, lingered in her memory, as did Mr. Hodges' mention of a heated exchange between Price and Evelyn. A man who guards his reputation fiercely, Miss Marple mused, may guard other secrets just as well. Determined to learn more, she decided to begin her day with a visit to the vicarage, where the vicar, Mr. Clement, was known to share a weekly chess game with Dr. Price. The vicarage, a rambling house with ivy-clad walls, was a short walk from Lilac Cottage, and Miss Marple set out, her umbrella tucked under her arm against the threatening drizzle. The village was quiet, save for the clatter of a milk cart and the distant bark of a dog. But the infirmary loomed in her thoughts, its red brick facade a silent witness to the night's violence. Mrs. Clement welcomed her with a flurry of warmth, ushering her into the parlour where a fire crackled cheerfully. "Oh, Miss Marple, what a dreadful affair at the infirmary," she said, pouring tea. "Poor Evelyn, such a loss. And the vicar's quite shaken, you know. He was fond of her." "I'm sure he is," Miss Marple said, settling into a armchair, "and Dr. Price, I imagine, must be under great strain, managing the infirmary now. I hear he and Nurse Carter worked closely together." Mrs. Clement's eyes widened, eager to share. "Oh yes, but not always smoothly, I'm afraid. The vicar mentioned it only last week. Evelyn was forever checking Dr. Price's orders, questioning doses and such. She meant well, of course, but Dr. Price found it tiresome. Too meticulous by half, he called her." Miss Marple's needles, drawn from her bag, began their soft clicking. "Tiresome," she repeated, her tone thoughtful. "And yet, such care is vital in a nurse, isn't it?" "Did the vicar say anything more about their disagreements?" Mrs. Clement leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Well, he did overhear them. Once, outside the church, Evelyn was insisting on reviewing some patient files, something about errors. I think Dr. Price was quite sharp with her, said it was his responsibility, not hers. The vicar thought it odd, for Evelyn wasn't one to overstep." Miss Marple nodded, her mind sifting the information. Errors in patient files. Could this connect to Grayson's questionable prescriptions, or was it a broader issue? She recalled the partially visible letter in Price's office, mentioning discrepancies. The pieces were scattered, but a pattern was forming, faint as a sketch in pencil. Thanking Mrs. Clement, Miss Marple made her way to the infirmary, this time under the pretext of donating a bundle of knitted blankets for the wards. The drizzle had begun, a fine mist that clung to her coat, but she scarcely noticed, her thoughts occupied by Dr. Price. The infirmary was subdued, its corridors empty save for a janitor sweeping near the surgery. Constable Reed, looking bored, nodded as she passed, and Miss Marple, with the ease of one who blends into the background, slipped into the main hall. Dr. Price's office was upstairs, a small room overlooking the garden, and Miss Marple, claiming a need to rest her feet, ascended the staircase slowly, her eyes alert. The door to his office was ajar, and she glimpsed Price at his desk, sorting papers with a frown. His white coat hung on a hook, and the jingle of keys came again as he shifted in his chair. Miss Marple, pausing as if to catch her breath, noted a drawer in his desk slightly open, revealing a stack of letters tied with string. One, at the top, bore a London postmark and the word urgent in bold ink. Before she could linger, Price glanced up, his eyes narrowing. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice clipped. "Can I help you?" "Oh, forgive me," she said, her smile disarming. "I was just bringing some blankets for the wards, Mrs. Clement's idea, you know. But I'm not as young as I was, and these stairs." She trailed off, fanning herself lightly. Price's expression softened, though his wariness remained. "The wards are downstairs," he said. "I'll have Clara take the blankets." "Of course," Miss Marple said, descending with deliberate care. But as she handed the bundle to Clara in the hall, she manoeuvred to pass the office door again, this time accidentally dropping her knitting bag. As she bent to retrieve it, she heard Price on the telephone, his voice low but tense. "No, it's under control. The files are secure. Just keep quiet." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she rose smoothly, her face betraying nothing. Files, again always files. And that letter, marked urgent. She thought of a doctor in a nearby town, years ago, who'd been caught altering records to cover a misdiagnosis. Could Price be shielding a similar mistake, one Evelyn had discovered? Or was he entangled in Grayson's deception, perhaps complicit in a scheme? Back in the hall, she lingered near the notice board, studying the staff roster while her mind worked. Clara, passing with the blankets, looked flustered, and Miss Marple seized the moment. "You're doing wonderfully, my dear," she said. "It must be hard, working under Dr. Price now, with all this upset." Clara's cheeks flushed. "He's particular," she said, "always locking his office, checking the cabinets. Evelyn used to say he was too fussy about his papers." "Fussy," Miss Marple echoed, her eyes kind but probing. "And Nurse Carter, she was particular about papers too, wasn't she? Charts, records, that sort of thing." Clara nodded, then hesitated, as if weighing her words. She was. Last night, she was going over Mr. Grayson's chart, muttering about dates not matching. "I didn't think much of it then, but—" Her voice faltered, and she hurried off, clutching the blankets. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Dates not matching, another thread, tying Grayson to Evelyn's final hours. But Price's role was less clear. His defensiveness, the locked office, the urgent letter, did they point to professional pride or something darker? She recalled the medicine cabinet key, still missing, and wondered if Price's jangling keys held the answer as she left the infirmary. The drizzle had thickened to a steady rain, and she opened her umbrella, her thoughts as layered as the clouds above. Dr. Price was a man under pressure, his authority a shield that might conceal guilt, fear, or both. She resolved to ask Raymond to inquire discreetly in London about Price's past, perhaps a call to a medical colleague could unearth old scandals. "A man who locks his secrets away," she murmured, "forgets how easily locks can be picked." Back at Lilac Cottage, she settled by the window, her knitting resumed but her mind far from the wool. The infirmary's secrets were piling like leaves in autumn, and Dr. Price, with his disdain and his keys, was at their centre. Miss Marple knew that patience, not haste, would reveal the truth, and in St. Mary Mead, where every glance held a story, she was never short of time to watch and wait. Chapter 5. The AIDS anxiety, the rain that had begun as a drizzle now fell in earnest over St. Mary Mead, cloaking the village in a silvery veil that muffled sound and softened edges. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the weather, sat in a parlour at Lilac Cottage, her knitting needles moving with a rhythm that belied the quickness of her thoughts. The infirmary murder occupied her mind like a chessboard, each suspect a piece with its own peculiar moves. Harold Grayson's nervous secrecy and Dr. Price's guarded demeanour had yielded threads of suspicion, but now her attention turned to Clara Dunn, the young nurse's aide whose trembling hands and hesitant words suggested a burden heavier than grief. Clara was a familiar type to Miss Marple, timid, dutiful, the sort of girl who faded into the background, yet saw more than she let on. Her fleeting mention of Evelyn's concern over dates not matching in Grayson's chart, coupled with her flustered retreat when pressed, hinted at knowledge, perhaps unwittingly held. Miss Marple recalled a housemaid from years past, a quiet girl who'd witnessed a theft but feared to speak, her silence born of loyalty rather than guilt. Could Clara be similarly caught, torn between truth and fear? And that notebook she clutched so tightly, what might it reveal? Determined to probe further, Miss Marple decided to attend the village hall's weekly sewing circle, where Clara was known to join other young women in stitching for charity. The hall, a sturdy building with a pitched roof, was a short walk. Through the rain-slicked lanes, and Miss Marple arrived with her umbrella and a basket of wool, her presence as unremarkable as the patter of rain on the windows. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of tea and damp coats, and a dozen women sat in a circle, their needles flashing as they chatted. Clara was there, seated near the edge, her head bent over a piece of embroidery. Her fingers moved mechanically, but her eyes were distant, and Miss Marple noted the faint redness around them, as if she'd been crying. Settling beside her with a kindly smile, Miss Marple drew out her knitting and began a soft conversation about the weather, easing Clara into talk as one might coax a skittish cat. "You've had a trying time, my dear," Miss Marple said at length, her tone gentle. "Working at the infirmary just now must be so difficult, with poor Nurse Carter gone." Clara's needle paused, and she nodded, her lips trembling. "It's awful, Miss Marple. I keep seeing her. In that office, with the scarf." Her voice broke, and she fumbled for a handkerchief, which Miss Marple supplied with a murmur of sympathy. There, Miss Marple said, patting her arm. "It's a shock for us all. You were fond of Nurse Carter, weren't you? Such a capable woman, always so careful with her work." Clara sniffed, clutching the handkerchief. "She was kind to me, even when I made mistakes. But she was strict, to always checking the charts, the medicines. She'd notice if a single pill was out of place." Miss Marple's needles clicked. Softly, her eyes warm but watchful. That must have been reassuring, working under someone so thorough. "I suppose you helped her with the records sometimes." Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting the handkerchief. "Sometimes I'd file things or fetch charts. But I wasn't allowed to touch the medicine cabinet. That was her job, or Dr. Price's. She kept the key on a chain, always." Miss Marple nodded, recalling the missing key. "And last night," she said, her voice as light as a breeze, "you were cleaning the wards, weren't you? It must have been quiet, just you and Nurse Carter in the infirmary." Clara's eyes flickered, and she looked down at her embroidery. "It was quiet, mostly. I was in the women's ward, tidying. But I heard voices, late, around 11. Evelyn's, and someone else's. They sounded angry." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained serene. "Angry voices. That's curious. Could you tell who it was?" Clara shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I couldn't hear the words, and I didn't want to pry. I just kept cleaning, then went home. But I wish I'd checked on her. Miss Marple, maybe she'd still be." Her words dissolved into a sob, and Miss Marple laid a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You mustn't blame yourself," she said. "You did your duty. But tell me, Clara, did you notice anything else? That night, anything out of place, perhaps?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to the other women who were engrossed in their own chatter. "There was one thing," she said softly. "When I passed the office earlier, Evelyn was at her desk, looking at a chart, Mr. Grayson's, I think. She was frowning like something was wrong, and there was a paper on the floor, crumpled, as if she'd dropped it." Miss Marple's needles paused, but she kept her tone casual. "A crumpled paper. That's not like Nurse Carter, from what I hear. Did you see what it was?" "No," Clara said, her voice tight. "I didn't look. I was in a hurry to finish. But I wrote it down in my notebook, just in case it mattered." She touched the small, leather-bound book tucked into her apron pocket, then drew her hand back, as if regretting the gesture. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, but she did not press. "How sensible of you," she said. "A notebook is a great help for keeping things straight. My niece does the same with her shopping lists." Clara managed a weak smile, but her fingers trembled as she resumed her stitching. Miss Marple, sensing the girl's limits, turned the conversation to the embroidery pattern, letting Clara relax. But her mind was alight with possibilities. Angry voices at 11 Grayson, Price, or perhaps Lillian Ward. And the crumpled paper, noted in Clara's book, could it be the same one Miss Marple had glimpsed under Grayson's pillow? The notebook itself was a treasure, but Clara's fear suggested she'd part with it only under gentle persuasion. As the sewing circle dispersed, Miss Marple walked home through the rain, her umbrella bobbing like a black mushroom. The village hall's warmth faded, replaced by the chill of her thoughts. Clara's anxiety was more than shock. It was the strain of knowing something dangerous, yet fearing to speak. Miss Marple thought of a young shopgirl she'd once known, who'd seen her employer pilfering but stayed silent, terrified of reprisal. Clara's notebook, like that girl's diary, might hold the key to unlocking the truth. Back at Lilac Cottage, she settled by the fire, her knitting resumed but her mind far from the wool. She considered Clara's role in the to Evelyn, privy to her routines, yet subordinate, easily overlooked. The angry voices suggested a confrontation, and Clara's presence in the wards placed her near the scene. Could she have witnessed more than she admitted? Or was her fear rooted in a mistake, perhaps a misfiled record, as Mrs. Clement had once mentioned, that Evelyn had corrected harshly? Miss Marple resolved to speak to Clara again, perhaps with Mrs. Clement's help, to coax her into sharing the notebook. She also made a mental note to inquire about the infirmary's logbook, which recorded visitors and staff movements. If Clara had heard voices at 11, the log might confirm who was present. "A timid girl," she murmured, her needles clicking. But even timid girls can hold the thread that unravels a mystery. Outside, the rain drummed on, and St. Mary Mead seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the truth to surface. Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, knew it would not in a rush, but in the slow, certain way of a stitch joining a seam. Chapter 6. The sisters saw the rain had softened to a faint mist by the following day, leaving St. Mary Mead glistening under a tentative sun. Miss Jane Marple, ever attuned to the village's pulse, noted the subdued chatter at the bakery. As she collected her morning loaf, the murder of Nurse Evelyn Carter remained the sole topic, with speculations swirling like leaves in the wind. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts were fixed on a figure less discussed but no less intriguing: Lillian Ward, Evelyn's estranged sister, whose unexpected visit and composed demeanor hinted at depths Clara's anxious whispers, Dr. Price's guarded secrecy, and Grayson's nervous mutterings had each added threads to the tapestry of the crime. But Lillian's cool reserve suggested a motive rooted in the past, perhaps as potent as any present: deceit. Lillian was staying at the Blue Boar, the village's only a quaint establishment with creaking floors and a reputation for discretion. Miss Marple, under the guise of delivering a jar of her homemade damson jam to the innkeeper. Mrs. Baxter set out after breakfast, her sensible shoes navigating the damp cobblestones with care. The Blue Boar's sign swung gently in the breeze, and inside, the air was warm with the scent of polished wood and brewing tea. Mrs. Baxter, a stout woman with a keen eye for gossip, greeted Miss Marple with a nod, accepting the jam with effusive thanks. "Such a kind thought, Miss Marple," she said, setting the jar behind the counter. "We're all at 6s and 7s with this dreadful business at the infirmary, and that Mrs. Ward staying here, she's a quiet one, but you can see the grief in her eyes. Miss Marple's expression was suitably sympathetic. Poor woman, losing her sister so suddenly. I suppose she's been keeping to herself. Mrs. Baxter leaned closer, her voice dropping. Mostly. She takes her meals in her room, writes letters, and goes for walks at odd hours. Came back late the night of the murder. Mind you, 11:30, and her coat all damp. Said she'd been out thinking, but in this weather, seemed peculiar to me. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her tone remained mild. 11:30, that's late for a stroll, especially in the rain. Did she say anything about her visit to the infirmary? Not a word, Mrs. Baxter replied, wiping her hands on her apron, only that she'd seen her sister and left early. But I heard from the barmaid she was asking about train times to London yesterday, as if she's eager to be off, thanking. Mrs. Baxter, Miss Marple lingered in the inn small parlour, where a fire crackled and a few locals sipped tea. Lillian Ward descended the stairs, her dark coat immaculate and a silk scarf, strikingly similar to Evelyn's, tied at her throat. She carried herself with the poise of a woman accustomed to city life, but her eyes, shadowed and wary, betrayed a private strain. Spotting Miss Marple, she hesitated, then approached, perhaps out of politeness. "Miss Marple, isn't it?" Lillian said, her voice low and measured. "Mrs. Baxter mentioned you're a village fixture. Kind of you to bring her jam." "Oh, a small gesture," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "I was so sorry to hear about your sister. It must be a terrible shock, coming to see her after so long." Lillian's lips tightened, but she nodded, settling into a chair opposite. "It is, Evelyn and I. We hadn't been close for years. I thought to mend things, but now—" She trailed off, her fingers brushing the scarf. Miss Marple's needles, drawn from her bag, began their soft clicking. "Family rifts are so painful," she said. "I understand you saw her that night. It must comfort you to have had that moment, however brief." Lillian's gaze flickered, and she adjusted her scarf. "We spoke, yes, in her office, about 9. It wasn't a long talk, cold grievances, you know. I left by 10, went for a walk to clear my head, then came back here." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes noting the expensive brooch pinned to Lillian's coat of sapphire. Too fine for a woman who'd hinted at financial strain. "A walk in the rain," she said, her tone gently curious. "You must have needed the air. Did you pass the infirmary again, by chance?" Lillian's fingers stilled, and for a moment her composure wavered. "No," she said, too quickly. "I took the lane by the church, kept away from the village. I needed to think." She rose, smoothing her coat. "If you'll excuse me, I have letters to write." Miss Marple watched her ascend the stairs, her mind alight with impressions. Lillian's swift denial, the damp coat at 11:30, and the costly brooch suggested discrepancies in her story. Had she lingered near the infirmary, perhaps, witnessing or causing the fatal confrontation? Miss Marple recalled a case in her youth, where a sister's jealousy over an inheritance had led to betrayal. Could money or some older wound have driven Lillian to violence? Determined to learn more, Miss Marple visited the post office next, where Mrs. Cleary, the postmistress, was sorting letters with her usual zeal. Under the pretext of mailing a parcel, Miss Marple steered the conversation to Lillian. "Such a sad visit for Mrs. Ward," she said. "I suppose she's been sending many letters with all the arrangements to be made." Mrs. Cleary's eyes sparkled with the joy of shared confidences. "Oh, She sent a few, one to London, marked urgent, and another to a lawyer in Exeter. I couldn't help but notice, with the address so clear, and she's been getting telegrams. 2-1 came yesterday, made her look right pale. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained serene. A lawyer, you say? Perhaps settling her sister's affairs. Perhaps, Mrs. Cleary said, leaning over the counter. But she's not been herself. Snapped at me when I asked if she'd stay for the funeral. Said she's leaving soon as the police allow. Thanking Mrs. Cleary, Miss Marple stepped into the street, her thoughts swirling. Letters to a lawyer, urgent telegrams, and a hasty departure. Lillian was a woman in a hurry, but why? The brooch nagged at her, a symbol of wealth at odds with Lillian's claim of past quarrels over money. Miss Marple thought of Evelyn's tidy office, the missing key, and the crumpled chart. Had Lillian come seeking something, money, documents, or perhaps a secret Evelyn held? Back at the Blue Boar that afternoon, Miss Marple, invited by Mrs. Baxter for tea, found Lillian absent. Her room locked. Mrs. Baxter, bustling with trays, mentioned Lillian had gone for another walk, this time toward the station. Checking trains again, she said. Odd, with the inquest still pending. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind tracing Lillian's movements. The innkeeper's account of her late return on the murder night, coupled with her evasive answers, suggested she'd been near the infirmary longer than admitted. Could she have overheard Evelyn's argument with Grayson or Price, or even confronted her sister again? The scarf, so like Evelyn's, was a chilling detail had Lillian chosen it deliberately, or was it mere coincidence? As she left the inn, Miss Marple paused by the churchyard, where the vicar was tending roses. She mentioned Lillian's visit, probing gently. Such a sad reunion, she said. I hear she and Nurse Carter had their differences. The vicar sighed, snipping a wilted bloom. They did. Evelyn once told me Lillian had a reckless streak, borrowing money, running up debts. Evelyn bailed her out more than once, but it strained things. I hoped they'd reconcile, but now, Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions deepening. Money, always money. The brooch, the lawyer, the urgent letters. Lillian's motives were taking shape, but the picture was incomplete. Had she killed to silence a refusal, or to seize something Evelyn possessed? Or was she merely a witness, caught in the wrong place? Back at Lilac Cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting a soft counterpoint to her racing thoughts. Lillian's sorrow seemed genuine, yet laced with calculation. The damp coat, the late return, the scarf all pointed to a woman who knew more than she told. Miss Marple resolved to watch her closely, perhaps through Mrs. Baxter's updates. A sister's sorrow, she murmured, her needles clicking, can hide a multitude of sins. In St. Mary Mead, where every shadow held a story, Miss Marple knew the truth was near, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. Chapter 7. A village whisper. The sun had gained strength by mid-morning, burning off the last of the mist and bathing St. Mary Mead in a gentle warmth that belied the chill of murder lingering in its lanes. Miss Jane Marple, her morning chores complete, sat in her garden at Lilac Cottage, pruning her roses with a pair of well-worn shears. The rhythmic snip of the blades kept time with her thoughts, which circled the infirmary and its web of secrets. Lillian Ward's evasive elegance, Clara's nervous reticence, Dr. Price's guarded keys, and Harold Grayson's muttered fears had each added a knot to the mystery, but Miss Marple knew that in a village like St. Mary Mead, the truth often lay not in grand revelations, but in the quiet whispers of everyday life. The village was a living tapestry, its threads woven from glances, half-heard conversations, and the small transactions of daily routine. Miss Marple, with her unerring instinct for such threads, decided to immerse herself in this fabric, trusting that the gossip of shopkeepers and the observations of neighbors would yield clues no police report could match. Her first stop was the post office, where Mrs. Cleary, the postmistress, presided over letters and rumors with equal zeal. Armed with a parcel of old magazines for her cousin in Devon, Miss Marple stepped into the cramped, ink-scented shop, the bell above the door chiming her arrival. Mrs. Cleary, her spectacles glinting, looked up from a stack of envelopes. "Miss Marple, what a treat," she said, her voice ripe with the promise of gossip. "Here to post that parcel, or is it the infirmary business bringing you out?" "Bit of both, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming as she handed over the parcel. "Such a sad affair. I was just thinking of Mr. Grayson, the patient there. He's not a local, is he? Quite a mystery, arriving so suddenly." Mrs. Cleary's eyes sparkled, and she leaned over the counter, lowering her voice. "Not local at all, and that's the truth. Came 2 months back, out of nowhere, with a letter from some London doctor. Nervous condition, they say, but he's cagey, if you ask me. Sent a letter himself last week, urgent-like, to a London address, some firm, I reckon, from the look of the envelope. Didn't put a return address, mind you, which struck me as odd." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained serene. "Urgent, you say? That's curious for a man so unwell. Did you happen to notice the firm's name?" Mrs. Cleary frowned, tapping her chin. "Something with Brothers in it, Harrington Brothers, maybe. I only glimpsed it, but it was a fancy letterhead, not the sort you'd expect from a patient in a village infirmary." Miss Marple nodded, filing the name away. "A London firm, possibly legal or financial, suggested Grayson was entangled in matters beyond his health. She thought of insurance schemes, where men fabricated ailments for payouts, and wondered if Grayson's nervous condition was such a ruse. "You're a marvel, Mrs. Cleary," she said. "The post office sees more of life than most." Flattered, Mrs. Cleary prattled on, mentioning Lillian Ward's telegrams and Dr. Price's habit of collecting his mail in person, as if he doesn't trust delivery. Miss Marple listened, her mind sifting each detail, then thanked her and stepped into the street. The parcel safely posted. Her next destination was the village shop, where Miss Hartnell, a spinster with a nose for scandal, dispensed groceries and opinions in equal measure. The shop was busy, with women queuing for flour and tea, their chatter a low hum of speculation about the murder. Miss Marple, selecting a tin of biscuits, joined the queue, her ears attuned to the conversation. "Mark my words," Miss Hartnell was saying to a customer, "that Grayson fellow's no good. I saw him in the lane last month, pacing like a caged fox, muttering to himself. Not the sort you'd want near a nurse, if you ask me." Miss Marple, reaching the counter, offered a sympathetic smile. "It's unsettling, isn't it, having a stranger in our midst at such a time? I hear Mr. Grayson keeps to himself, though," Miss Hartnell snorted, wrapping the biscuits in brown paper. "Too much, if you ask me. Never joins the church socials, never chats with folk. Mrs. Price, she's the doctor's wife, you know, told me he pays his bills in cash, always crisp notes, like he's got money to burn. Odd for a man on sick leave, wouldn't you say?" "Very odd," Miss Marple agreed, her mind racing. Crisp notes, an urgent letter to a London firm, and a secretive demeanor. Grayson's behavior pointed to a man guarding a double life. She recalled the crumpled paper under his pillow, possibly a letter or receipt, and resolved to find a way to glimpse it. As she left the shop, she paused by the churchyard, where the vicar was polishing the brass on the gate. Mr. Clement, a gentle soul with a knack for noticing human frailties, greeted her warmly. "Miss Marple, you're a sight for sore eyes. This murder has the whole parish in a tizzy." "I can imagine," Miss Marple said, adjusting her hat. "I was just thinking of the infirmary's visitors that night. Mrs. Ward, for instance, such a sad reunion with her sister. And Mr. Grayson, so unwell, yet so private. Do you know much about him?" The vicar sighed, setting down his cloth. "Not much, I'm afraid. He's not a churchgoer, though Evelyn tried to draw him out. She mentioned once that he seemed haunted, is the word she used. Kept asking for his chart to be locked away, as if he feared someone reading it." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, but her tone was mild. Haunted, how interesting. And Nurse Carter, did she ever speak of her sister's visit? "Only in passing," Mr. Clement said. "She was surprised Lillian came after so many years. Said they'd argued over money long ago, but she hoped to make amends. I fear they had little chance." Thanking him, Miss Marple walked home, her mind a whirl of whispers. Grayson's urgent letter to Harrington Brothers, his cash payments, and his fear of his chart being read all pointed to a secret worth protecting, perhaps a falsified illness, as she'd suspected. The locked filing cabinet in Evelyn's office, noted during her first visit, loomed large. Had Grayson tampered with his records, and had Evelyn's diligence threatened to expose him? The vicar's mention of Lillian's money disputes added. Another layer: could she have sought something from Evelyn, only to be rebuffed? Back at Lilac Cottage, Miss Marple settled by her window, her knitting a soft counterpoint to her thoughts. She considered the filing cabinet, its key missing, and Grayson's proximity to the office. The crumpled paper under his pillow nagged. At her could it be a draft of the letter Mrs. Cleary described? She resolved to visit the infirmary again, perhaps with Mrs. Clement, to observe Grayson and inquire about the logbook Clara had mentioned. "Whispers," she murmured, "her needles clicking are the village's heartbeat, and they always lead somewhere." In St. Mary Mead, where every word carried weight, Miss Marple knew the truth was close, hidden in the quiet corners of gossip and glance, waiting for her to weave it into light. Chapter 8. The Crumpled Chart. The late morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Lilac Cottage, casting delicate patterns across Miss Jane Marple's parlour. She sat by her writing desk, a cup of tea cooling beside her, her eyes fixed on a small notebook where she jotted her observations about the infirmary murder, the whispers of St. Mary, Mead Grayson's urgent letter, Lillian's damp coat, Clara's anxious hesitations, and Dr. Price's locked secrets had woven a complex web, but Miss Marple knew that the truth often lay in the smallest snag, a single detail that pulled the threads apart. Her thoughts returned to the infirmary office, where the crumpled chart and the smudge of ink had first caught her eye. Harold Grayson's name on that chart, coupled with his muttered fears, suggested a secret tied to his medical records, and Miss Marple was determined to unravel it. She decided to return to the infirmary, this time with a practical excuse: a bundle of lavender sachets for the wards, a gift to soothe the patient's nerves. The walk through St. Mary Mead was pleasant, the air crisp with the scent of wood smoke and the first fallen leaves. The village buzzed with its usual rhythm, but the infirmary, as she approached, stood apart, its red brick walls a silent sentinel of the night's tragedy. Constable Reed, stationed at the entrance, greeted her with a nod, accustomed to her comings and goings. Inside, the corridors were quiet, the staff moving with the subdued efficiency of those shaken but duty-bound. Miss Marple made her way to the nurse's station, where Clara Dunn was sorting bandages, her face pale but composed. "Miss Marple," Clara said, managing a small smile, "more gifts. You're too kind. Just a few sachets," Miss Marple said, setting the bundle down. "Lavender does wonders for rest. You're managing splendidly, my dear, under such strain. I suppose Inspector Crane has been keeping you busy with questions." Clara's hands faltered, and she nodded. "He's been through the logbook, checking who was here that night. It's all a blur, but I told him what I could." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her tone remained casual. "The logbook, how sensible. It must show everyone's comings and goings. Did it mention Mr. Grayson, perhaps, being so close? To the office, he might have stirred." Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting a bandage. I didn't look closely, but the inspector said it showed Mr. Grayson left his ward at 11, just for a moment. He claimed he needed air, but—" Her voice trailed off, and she glanced nervously toward the men's ward. Miss Marple nodded, her mind latching onto the detail. Grayson's alibi, already thin, was crumbling. She thanked Clara and moved toward the office, where Inspector Crane was examining papers with a furrowed brow. He looked up as she approached, his mustache twitching with mild exasperation. "Miss Marple," he said, "you're here more often than my constables. Don't tell me you've another theory." "Only a small observation," she said, her smile disarming. "I was thinking about that chart on Nurse Carter's desk, Mr. Grayson's, wasn't it? It seemed rather crumpled, as if handled in a hurry. Have you had a chance to examine it?" Crane's eyes narrowed, but he gestured to the desk, where the chart lay among other files. "You've a sharp eye," he admitted. "We did look at it. The dates on Grayson's admission forms don't add up. Some entries look altered, like someone changed the diagnosis dates. Could be a clerical error, but with Nurse Carter's reputation for precision, I doubt it." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained serene. "Altered, you say? That's most curious. And the logbook, Clara mentioned it, showed Mr. Grayson out of his ward at 11. Perhaps he was checking his chart, or ensuring no one else did." Crane grunted, jotting a note. "We're ahead of you there. Confronted Grayson this morning. Got all flustered, insisted he went for a walk in the corridor. Nothing more. But he's hiding something, mark my words." Miss Marple peered at the chart, noting the faint ink smudge on its edge, similar to the one on the office floor. "Ink can be so telling," she said, almost to herself. "It clings where it's not wanted. Did you notice, Inspector, if Mr. Grayson had any stains on his hands?" Crane blinked, caught off guard. "Didn't check his hands, but his cuff there was a spot of ink. Now you mention it. Thought it was from his fountain pen, but—" He trailed off, his eyes sharpening. "You think he was in the office, tampering with the chart?" "I think," Miss Marple said, her tone mild, "that a man who leaves his ward at 11, with ink on his cuff and a chart in disarray, is a man worth watching. Might I suggest looking at the filing cabinet? If Nurse Carter suspected tampering, she may have locked the original records there." Crane nodded, his skepticism giving way to grudging respect. "We'll check it, though the key's still missing. You've a knack for this, Miss Marple, I'll give you that." She left the office, her mind alight with possibilities. The altered dates, the ink smudge, and Grayson's late-night wanderings pointed to a desperate attempt to conceal a lie, perhaps a fabricated illness, as she'd suspected from Mr. Hodges' account of his prescriptions. The filing cabinet, locked and keyless, was a vault of secrets, and Miss Marple suspected Grayson had sought to ensure its contents remained hidden. Her next move was to observe Grayson himself. Under the pretext of delivering a sachet to his ward, she entered the men's ward, finding him alone, propped against his pillows. His face was haggard, his eyes darting to the door as she approached. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice warm, "I brought a little lavender for your bedside. It might help you rest." Grayson's smile was strained, his hands clutching the blanket. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I'm not much for scents, but it's kind of you." She set the sachet down, her eyes noting the absence of the crumpled paper. She'd glimpsed under his pillow. Had he hidden it or destroyed it? "You must be eager to recover," she said, "with all this upset. Nurse Carter was so thorough with her records, wasn't she? It's a comfort to know your care was in such capable hands." Grayson's jaw tightened and his fingers twitched. "She was particular," he said, "always fussing over charts. Didn't miss a trick." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering. On his cuff, where a faint ink stain lingered, barely visible but unmistakable. "Charts are so important," she said. "Mistakes can cause such trouble. I suppose she checked yours often, being a new patient." His eyes flickered with unease, but he shrugged. "Suppose so. I don't pay much mind to paperwork." His voice was curt, and he turned away, feigning a cough, sensing his guard was up. Miss Marple withdrew, but not before noting a small desk in the ward's corner, its drawer slightly ajar. Could the crumpled paper be there? She resolved to find a way to check, perhaps through Clara, who had access to the wards. As she left the infirmary, the sun was high, casting sharp shadows across the gravel path. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the logbook, which had confirmed Grayson's movements. She recalled Clara's mention of angry voices at 11. Had Grayson confronted Evelyn, or had another been present? The ink stain tied him to the office, but the missing key suggested another hand, perhaps Price's, whose jangling keys haunted her memory. Back at Lilac Cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting a soft rhythm against her racing thoughts. The crumpled chart, the ink on Grayson's cuff, and his late-night wanderings painted a picture of a man desperate to hide a falsehood. But the locked cabinet and the missing key hinted at a broader conspiracy. One, Evelyn had died to protect her. Expose a chart, she murmured, her needles clicking, is a map of lies, and someone drew it with care. She resolved to press Clara about the logbook and the crumpled paper, and to ask her nephew Raymond to inquire about Harrington Brothers, the London firm tied to Grayson's letter. In St. Mary Mead, where every detail was a whisper of truth. Miss Marple knew the puzzle was nearing its heart, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 9. The Doctor's Dilemma. Afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, its golden light threading through the elms and casting long shadows across the village green. Miss Jane Marple, her morning's work at the infirmary still fresh. In her mind, sat in her parlour at Lilac Cottage, a tray of tea and shortbread before her. The crumpled chart, Harold Grayson's ink-stained cuff, and the locked filing cabinet had tightened the net around the nervous patient. But Miss Marple's thoughts now turned to Dr. Leonard Price, whose brusque authority and jangling keys suggested a man not merely burdened by duty, but entangled in the very secrets Evelyn Carter had died to protect or expose. The doctor's tense phone call overheard during her visit, and the urgent letter in his desk drawer hinted at a dilemma deeper than professional oversight. And Miss Marple was determined to probe its contours. Dr. Price's role in the infirmary was pivotal, his control over prescriptions and records absolute. Yet his clashes with Evelyn over protocols, as the vicar's wife had revealed, suggested a friction that might have sparked more than words. The missing medicine cabinet key, the altered dates on Grayson's chart, and Price's insistence on locking his office all pointed to a man guarding something precious: reputation, perhaps, or complicity in a scheme. Miss Marple recalled a country doctor from her youth, struck off for falsifying prescriptions to fund a gambling habit. His downfall marked by just such defensiveness. Could Price be shielding a similar transgression when Evelyn's meticulous nature had threatened to uncover? To test this thread, Miss Marple resolved to enlist her nephew, Raymond West, whose London connections could unearth whispers of Price's past. She penned a brief letter, her handwriting precise, asking Raymond to inquire discreetly among medical circles about any old scandals or lawsuits involving Dr. Price. Sealing the envelope, she set out for the post office, her umbrella tucked under her arm, though the sky was clear. The village was lively, with children playing near the pond and shopkeepers sweeping their stoops. But the infirmary's shadow lingered, its mystery a quiet pulse beneath the day's bustle. At the post office, Mrs. Cleary was sorting parcels, her chatter as brisk as ever. Miss Marple, posting her letter, steered the conversation to Dr. Price. "Such a strain he must be under," she said, "managing the infirmary alone now. I suppose he's been too busy to collect his mail in person, as he usually does." Mrs. Cleary's eyes gleamed. "Oh, he was here this morning, snappy as you like. Picked up a letter from London, thick one, legal. Looked like it rattled him, for he stuffed it in his pocket and left without a word." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her smile was serene. "Legal, you say? Perhaps hospital business. He's such a meticulous man, always locking things away, that he is," Mrs. Cleary said, leaning closer. "My cousin's girl, who cleans at the infirmary, says he's got a safe in his office now, bolted to the floor. Keeps patient files in it, she reckons, though why he needs a safe, when there's a filing cabinet, I couldn't say." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind alight with the image of a safe, a locked office, a missing key, and now a safe Price was a man barricading his secrets. The legal letter, like the one she'd glimpsed in his drawer, suggested external pressures, perhaps tied to Grayson's altered chart or Evelyn's suspicions. She recalled Clara's mention of Evelyn checking Grayson's chart for mismatched dates. Had Price overseen those changes, or merely failed to notice them? Her next move was the infirmary, where she hoped to observe Price and perhaps glimpse the safe. Under the pretext of inquiring about a knitting pattern for Clara, she entered the building, nodding to Constable Reed, who was now a fixture at the door. The corridors were hushed, the air heavy with antiseptic and unspoken questions. Clara was in the women's ward, folding linens, and Miss Marple approached with a warm smile. "Clara, my dear," she said, "I was hoping you might know a stitch. For a baby's blanket, Mrs. Clement's niece is expecting. But I won't keep you long with all your duties." Clara's face softened, though her eyes were wary. "I'd be glad to help, Miss Marple. Nice to think of something normal." As they chatted about knitting, Miss Marple gently steered the conversation. "You're doing so well, managing without Nurse Carter. She must have relied on Dr. Price for so much, though I hear they didn't always see eye to eye." Clara's hands paused, and she glanced toward the stairs. They didn't, not always. Evelyn thought he was too quick with some prescriptions, Mr. Grayson's especially. She said once his doses didn't match his symptoms, but Dr. Price told her to leave it be. Miss Marple's needles, drawn from her bag, began their soft clicking. How curious, she said. And she was checking his chart that night, wasn't she? Perhaps she found something amiss. Clara nodded, her voice low. She did. I heard her tell Dr. Price about it a few days before, in his office. He was cross, said she was meddling. I didn't think much of it then, but now, her words faltered, and she busied herself with the linens. Miss Marple patted her arm, sensing her unease. You've been most helpful, my dear. I'll let you get on. But as she turned to leave, she maneuvered past the staircase, pausing as if to adjust her shawl. The door to Price's office was closed, but through a narrow window she glimpsed him at his desk. His head bent over a thick envelope, likely the legal letter Mrs. Cleary had described. A small safe, its door ajar, sat in the corner, its contents obscured. Before she could linger, Price looked up, his eyes narrowing. Miss Marple moved on, her heart racing but her step unhurried. The safe, the letter, and Clara's account of the dispute over Grayson's prescriptions painted a picture of a doctor under siege, his authority challenged by Evelyn's diligence. Had she uncovered a mistake or worse, a deliberate fraud? Miss Marple thought of the London doctor, struck off for misdiagnosing patients to inflate fees, and wondered if Price's reputation hung on a similar thread. Back in the village, she stopped at the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was arranging flowers for the church. Over tea, Miss Marple probed gently about Price's habits. He's such a dedicated man, she said, but I imagine Nurse Carter's thoroughness tested his patience. Mrs. Clement sighed, snipping a rose stem. It did. The vicar heard them arguing once about a patient's file. Grayson's, I think. Evelyn insisted on reporting an error to the hospital board, but Dr. Price said it would ruin his standing. He was quite sharp with her. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, but her tone was mild. Ruin his standing, that's a strong word. Did she say what the error was? Not to the vicar, Mrs. Clement said, but she was adamant, said it wasn't just a mistake, but something deliberate. I think she meant to write to London about it. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind racing. A deliberate error, a report to London. And Price's fear of ruin Evelyn had been a threat, not just to Grayson, but to the doctor himself. The safe, the legal letter, and the missing key suggested Price was scrambling to contain the damage. But had he resorted to murder? Or was he merely a bystander, caught in Grayson's web? Back at Lilac Cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting a soft counterpoint to her thoughts. She considered Price's dilemma, a man of authority, facing exposure for a mistake or complicity that could end his career. The safe, likely holding the original records Evelyn had questioned, was a fortress he could not abandon. But the ink on Grayson's cuff, not Price's, tied the patient to the office. A doctor's dilemma, she murmured, her needles clicking, is a patient's crime, but the two may share a shadow. She resolved to await Raymond's reply about Price's past and to press Clara about the logbook, which might confirm Price's movements that night. In St. Mary Mead, where every secret left a trace, Miss Marple knew the truth was close, a single stitch from breaking free. Chapter 10. The Aide's Notebook. The soft glow of dusk settled over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of amber and violet as the day's warmth gave way to a crisp evening chill. Miss Jane Marple, having spent the afternoon tending her garden, now sat in her parlour at Lilac Cottage, her knitting needles idle in her lap. The fire crackled gently, casting flickering shadows across the room, but her mind was far from the cosy domesticity of the moment. The infirmary murder, with its tangle of motives and secrets, had grown clearer with each careful step. Yet the truth remained just out of reach, like a word hovering on the tip of the tongue. Harold Grayson's ink-stained cuff and falsified chart, Dr. Price's locked safe and legal worries, and Lillian Ward's evasive sorrow had each added a piece to the puzzle. But it was Clara Dunn, the timid aide with her clutched notebook, who now held Miss Marple's attention. Clara's anxiety, her whispered hints of angry voices and crumpled papers, suggested she had seen nor knew more than she dared admit. The notebook, mentioned fleetingly at the sewing circle, was a tantalizing clue, its pages perhaps holding the key to Evelyn Carter's final hours. Miss Marple recalled a village girl from years past, a shy creature who'd kept a diary of her employer's misdeeds, her scribbled notes the undoing of a thief. Could Clara's notebook be such a record, a quiet testimony to the night's events? And if so, how could it be coaxed from her trembling hands without deepening her fear? Determined to pursue this thread, Miss Marple resolved to seek Clara at the village hall, where a small gathering was planned to organize a memorial for Nurse Carter. The event, organized by Mrs. Clement, offered a perfect opportunity to speak with Clara in a setting less charged than the infirmary. Donning her coat and hat, Miss Marple set out, her umbrella tucked under her arm as a precaution against the evening's damp. The village was quiet, its lanes lit by the soft glow of cottage windows, and the hall, a sturdy building with a warm, inviting light, hummed with the low murmur of voices inside. A dozen villagers milled about, arranging flowers and discussing hymns. Clara stood near a table, sorting donation cards, her face pale but composed. Mrs. Clement, bustling with purpose, greeted Miss Marple warmly. "Oh, Miss Marple, how good of you to come," she said. "We're all determined to honor Evelyn. Properly, Clara's been a great help, poor dear." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes resting on Clara. "She's a treasure," she said. "I'll just have a word with her, if I may." She approached the table, her manner as unassuming as ever, and offered Clara a gentle smile. "You're doing splendidly, my dear. It's a comfort to see Nurse Carter so well remembered." Clara's hands paused, and she managed a nod. "It's the least I can do, Miss Marple. She was so good to me, even when I muddled things." Miss Marple's needles, drawn from her bag, began their soft clicking. "We all muddle now and then," she said. "You were so busy that night, cleaning the wards. It's a wonder you kept track of everything. I recall you mentioned your notebooks, a clever habit, jotting things down." Clara's fingers tightened on a card, and her eyes flickered with unease. "It's just notes, you know. Times, tasks, nothing important." "Oh, but it's the small things that matter," Miss Marple said, her tone encouraging. "I used to keep a little book myself, for recipes and such. Yours must be full of useful details, perhaps even something about that night, like the voices you heard." Clara's cheeks flushed, and she glanced around, as if fearing eavesdroppers. I did write a bit," she admitted, her voice barely audible, "about Evelyn, and the chart, and other things. But I'm afraid to show it, Miss Marple." "What if it makes trouble?" Miss Marple leaned closer, her eyes kind but steady. "My dear, the truth never makes trouble, not in the end. If you saw something or heard something, it could help Inspector Crane find justice for Nurse Carter. You'd like that, wouldn't you? Clara hesitated, her hand straying to her apron pocket, where the notebook's outline was just visible. After a long moment, she nodded, her resolve wavering. I suppose I could show you, but not here, somewhere quiet. Miss Marple suggested the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement could provide tea and privacy. Clara agreed, and they slipped out of the hall. Walking the short distance to the ivy-clad house, Mrs. Clement, sensing the importance of the moment, ushered them into the parlour and left them with a pot of tea, closing the door softly behind her. Seated by the fire, Clara drew the notebook from her pocket, its leather cover worn but intact. She opened it with trembling hands, revealing pages filled with neat, hurried script. I write everything, she said. Times I start and finish. Things Evelyn asked me to do. That night, I wrote about the voices and the chart, and she turned to a page marked with a date the night of the murder and pointed to an entry dot. Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes scanning the text. The entry noted Clara's tasks until midnight, then a brief line. 11 p.m. heard Evelyn in office, arguing. Man's voice, angry, sounded like Mr. G about records. Below it, another note. Saw crumpled paper on floor, G's chart open. Evelyn said falsified before I left. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her voice remained calm. Falsified, she echoed. That's a strong word. Did you hear anything else, Clara, or see who was with her? Clara shook her head, her eyes wide. I didn't stay. I was scared, and I thought it wasn't my place. But I saw Mr. Grayson in the corridor later, near the office. He looked wild, like he'd been running. Miss Marple nodded, her mind fitting the pieces together. Grayson in the corridor at 11, arguing with Evelyn about falsified records. Clara's notebook confirmed the logbook's record and the ink on his cuff. The crumpled paper, likely the same one Miss Marple had, glimpsed under his pillow, could be a draft or proof of his deception. But Clara's fear suggested she'd withheld this from Inspector Crane, perhaps dreading Grayson's reaction or another's. You've been very brave, Miss Marple said, patting Clara's hand. This could be vital, but we must be careful. Would you let me show this to Inspector Crane? I'd stay with you, and we'd keep it quiet. Clara bit her lip, then nodded, handing over the notebook. I just want it to be over, she whispered. I keep thinking, if I'd stayed, maybe she'd be alive. You mustn't blame yourself, Miss Marple said. You've done more than most. She tucked the notebook into her bag, her mind already racing ahead. Clara's account placed. Grayson at the scene, his motive clear. Evelyn had discovered his falsified records, threatening whatever scheme insurance, perhaps tied to Harrington Brothers he'd woven. But Dr. Price's role nagged at her. Had he known of the falsification, or was his dilemma merely a fear of scandal? The next morning, Miss Marple accompanied Clara to the police station, a small building near the village green. Inspector Crane, bleary-eyed from late hours, listened as Clara recounted her story, the notebook open before him. His mustache twitched as he read the key entry, and he fixed Clara with a stern but not unkind look. You should have come forward sooner, Miss Dunn, he said. This puts Grayson in a tight spot. We'll bring him in again, check his story against this. Clara, bolstered by Miss Marple's presence, nodded. I was afraid, sir, but I want to help. Crane turned to Miss Marple, his expression a mix of irritation and respect. You've a way of turning up evidence, Miss Marple. Anything else you're holding back? Only a thought, she said, her tone mild. The filing cabinet in the office, have you managed to open it? If Nurse Carter suspected falsification, she may have kept proof there, Crane grunted. Still no key, but we're getting a locksmith. I'll let you know if it turns up anything. He dismissed them, already reaching for his telephone. As they left, Miss Marple patted Clara's arm. You've done the right thing, my dear. Now rest, and leave the rest to the inspector. Back at Lilac Cottage, Miss Marple settled by the window. Her knitting resumed, but her thoughts far from the wall. Clara's notebook had tightened the noose around Grayson, but the missing key and Price's safe suggested another layer perhaps. A shared secret, or a separate crime. A notebook, she murmured, her needles clicking, is a mirror of the mind, and this one reflects a killer's fear. She resolved to await Crane's findings on the cabinet and Raymond's reply about Price's past, knowing that in St. Mary Mead, where every secret left a trace, the truth was a single step away. Chapter 11. The sisters' Alabitha morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, draping the village in a gauzy veil that softened the outlines of cottages and hedgerows. Miss Jane Marple, ever an early riser, stood at her kitchen window, watching the world emerge from the haze as she sipped her tea. The Infirmary murder, now a tapestry of tightly woven threads, occupied her thoughts, each suspect's secrets adding depth to the pattern. Clara's notebook had all but confirmed Harold Grayson's presence in Evelyn Carter's office. His motive tied to falsified records, but Miss Marple's mind lingered on Lillian Ward, the estranged sister whose composed sorrow and late-night wanderings suggested a role yet to be clarified. The damp coat, the expensive brooch, and the urgent telegrams hinted at a woman whose alibi was as fragile as the mist outside. And Miss Marple was determined to test its strength. Lillian's movements on the night of the murder, her claim of leaving the infirmary by 10, only to return to the Blue Boar at 11:30, nagged at Miss Marple like a loose stitch. Mrs. Baxter's account of her dishevelled state, coupled with her evasive answers at the inn, suggested she had lingered near the infirmary, perhaps witnessing or participating in the fatal confrontation. The brooch, a sapphire gleam at odds with Lillian's tale of financial strain, raised questions of motive. Had she sought money from Evelyn, or something more tangible, like documents, or a key? Miss Marple recalled a case from her youth, where a sister's greed had turned to theft, and wondered if Lillian's visit masked a darker intent. Determined to probe further, Miss Marple decided to revisit the Blue Boar, where Lillian was still, staying her departure delayed by Inspector Crane's request to remain in the village. Under the pretext of returning a borrowed teacup to Mrs. Baxter, she set out, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path. The village was stirring, with the baker's boy whistling as he made deliveries and the postman cycling past, but the infirmary's shadow hung heavy, its mystery a quiet undercurrent in the morning's bustle. The Blue Boar's parlour was warm and inviting, the scent of fresh scones mingling with polished wood. Mrs. Baxter, bustling behind the counter, greeted Miss Marple with a smile. "Back so soon, Miss Marple. You're keeping us in fine spirits with your visits." "Just a small errand," Miss Marple said, setting the teacup down, "and a chance to see how you're faring with all this upset. Mrs. Ward must be finding it hard, staying on in such circumstances." Mrs. Baxter's eyes gleamed with the promise of gossip. "She's a cool one, I'll say. Keeps to her room, writing letters and taking calls. But that night, oh, I can't forget how she looked, coming in at 11:30, her coat soaked, and her face like she'd seen a ghost. Said she'd been walking, but I'd wager she was near the infirmary. Mark my words. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her tone remained mild. So late, and in the rain. That's curious. Did she mention anything the next day? Perhaps about her sister or the infirmary? Not a peep, Mrs. Baxter said, lowering her voice. But she asked me to burn some papers yesterday, old letters, she said. I didn't, of course, thought the inspector might want a look. There in the back, if you're curious. Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though she kept her expression serene. How thoughtful of you, she said. Perhaps I could glance at them, just to ease my mind. One never knows what might help poor Evelyn's case. Mrs. Baxter led her to a small storeroom, where a bundle of papers, charred at the edges, lay in a tin. Miss Marple, with the innkeeper's permission, sifted through them, her fingers careful. Most were mundane bills, a train timetable, but one fragment caught her eye. A half-burned letter, its handwriting sharp and formal, addressed to Lillian from a London solicitor. The visible text mentioned debts and Evelyn's refusal, with a warning about legal consequences. The rest was lost to the flames, but Miss Marple's mind raced. Debts and Evelyn's refusal. Had Lillian come seeking a loan, only to be rebuffed? Thanking Mrs. Baxter, Miss Marple returned to the parlour, where Lillian herself appeared, descending the stairs with her usual poise. Her dark coat was impeccable, the sapphire brooch glinting at her collar, but her eyes were shadowed, as if sleep had been a stranger. She paused, spotting Miss Marple, and offered a polite nod. Miss Marple, you're a frequent visitor, she said, her voice smooth but guarded. Mrs. Baxter's lucky to have such a friend. Oh, I like to keep busy, Miss Marple said, settling into a chair with her knitting bag. And you, my dear, must be finding these days so trying. I was just thinking of your visit to the infirmary that night, a bittersweet moment, I'm sure. Lillian's fingers brushed her brooch, and she sat opposite, her posture rigid. It was, she said. Evelyn and I had our differences, but I hoped to make peace. We talked, argued a bit, and I left by 10. I walked to clear my head. That's all. Miss Marple's needles began their soft clicking, her eyes warm but watchful. A walk in the rain, she said. You must have needed the solitude. I suppose you avoided the infirmary, with all the memories it held. Lillian's gaze flickered, and her voice tightened. I took the church lane, kept to myself. I didn't go back. She paused, then added, I heard the police suspect that patient, Grayson. He was in the ward, wasn't he? Close to Evelyn's? Office Miss Marple nodded, noting the deflection. Indeed, he was. But you'd have passed the infirmary earlier, perhaps seen someone lingering. The windows are so large, one can't help but notice. Lillian's lips thinned, and for a moment her composure wavered. I did glance at the office window, from the path, she admitted. I saw Grayson near the door, looking agitated, but I didn't stop. I thought it was hospital business. She rose, smoothing her coat. I must pack. The inspector says I can leave soon. Miss Marple watched her ascend the stairs, her mind alight with impressions. Lillian's admission, Grayson at the office door aligned with Clara's notebook, and the logbook tightening the case against him. But her late return, the burned letter, and the brooch suggested a motive of her own. Had she lingered, hoping to retrieve something from Evelyn, only to witness Grayson's crime? Or was her alibi a careful construct, hiding a confrontation gone wrong? Determined to clarify, Miss Marple visited the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was preparing for the memorial. Over tea, she probed gently about Lillian's past with Evelyn. Such a sad rift, she said. I hear money was at the heart of it. Mrs. Clement sighed, arranging a vase of lilies. It was. Evelyn told the vicar Lillian had run up debts gambling mostly. Evelyn paid them off once, but refused after that. Lillian resented it, thought Evelyn was hoarding their parents' legacy. I believe she came hoping for a share, but Evelyn wasn't one to bend. Miss Marple thanked her, her suspicions deepening. The burned letters' mention of debts and Evelyn's refusal painted a picture of desperation. Lillian's brooch, perhaps a recent acquisition, suggested she'd found money elsewhere, taken it. Miss Marple thought of the missing key, wondering if Lillian had sought access to Evelyn's records, or even her personal effects. Back at Lilac Cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting a soft rhythm against her racing thoughts. Lillian's alibi was fraying her late return, her sighting of Grayson, and the burned letter pointed to a woman caught in a web of need and opportunity. Yet Grayson's presence in the office, confirmed by multiple sources, kept him central. Had Lillian seen the murder, or merely its prelude? An alibi, she murmured, her needles clicking, is only as strong as the truth behind it, and this one is threadbare. She resolved to share Lillian's admission with Inspector Crane, urging him to check the burned papers, and to await news on the filing cabinet which might hold Evelyn's proof of Grayson's fraud. In St. Mary Mead, where every glance carried a story, Miss Marple knew the truth was near, a single tug from unraveling the knot. Chapter 12. The truth unravelled the soft light of a late autumn afternoon, bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden hush. The village's lanes, quiet save for the rustle of leaves skittering across the cobblestones. Miss Jane Marple, her morning spent in quiet reflection at Lilac Cottage, now prepared for a final reckoning at the Infirmary, where Inspector Crane had agreed to gather the suspects for a discussion of new evidence. The threads of the murder Harold Grayson's falsified chart, Dr. Price's guarded secrets, Clara Dunn's notebook, and Lillian Ward's fragile alibi had woven a tapestry of deception, and Miss Marple, with her unerring instinct for human frailty, sensed the moment had come to pull the final stitch and reveal the pattern beneath that, the infirmary. Its red brick facade, softened by the afternoon glow, stood as a sombre stage for the gathering. Miss Marple arrived with her knitting bag, her presence requested by Crane, who, though gruff, had come to value her insights. The main hall, usually bustling with staff, was arranged with chairs in a semicircle, and Constable Reed stood watch. At the door, Grayson, pale and fidgety, sat with his hands clasped. Dr. Price, his face a mask of strained composure, adjusted his cufflinks. Clara, clutching her apron, looked as if she might bolt, and Lillian, elegant but tense, sat with her, sapphire brooch glinting like a wary eye. Crane, notebook in hand, nodded to Miss Marple as she took a seat, her needles already clicking softly. "Thank you for coming," Crane began, his mustache twitching. "We've new evidence in Nurse Carter's murder, and I want to clear things up, Miss Marple. You've been helpful, so I've asked her to share her thoughts." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but her tone was mild. "You're very kind, Inspector. I've only observed, as one does in a village. Nurse Carter was killed because she knew too much about a secret that threatened ruin. Let's start with the night she died." She turned to Grayson, her gaze gentle but piercing. "Mr. Grayson, your chart was on her desk, crumpled, with altered dates. Clara heard you arguing with Evelyn at 11 about records. The logbook shows you left your ward then, and ink on your cuff matches a smudge in the office. You were hiding something, weren't you? A falsified illness, perhaps to secure an insurance payout. Grayson's face drained of color, his hands trembling. I didn't mean any harm, he stammered. It was just a plan to get some money. I changed the dates, made it look like a heart condition. Evelyn found out she was going to report it. Miss Marple nodded, her needle steady. And so you panicked. Clara's notebook notes you in the corridor, looking wild. Lillian saw you near the office door, agitated. You confronted Evelyn, and when she wouldn't yield, you used her scarf, such a personal thing, to silence her. Grayson's shoulders slumped, his voice a broken whisper. It wasn't planned. She was going to ruin me, my claim, my future. I grabbed the scarf, just to scare her, but it happened so fast. I didn't mean to kill her. He buried his face in his hands, sobbing. Crane signaled to Constable Reed, who stepped forward. But Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice calm. One moment, Inspector. There's more to understand. Dr. Price, you knew of the discrepancies, didn't you? Evelyn argued with you about Grayson's prescriptions doses that didn't match his symptoms. You feared a scandal, perhaps a mark on your record, but you didn't act. Your safe, your legal letters, they were about protecting your reputation, not murder. Price's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly. She wanted to report it to the board. I told her to wait, that I'd handle it. I should have listened, but I didn't kill her. I was upstairs, as I said. Miss Marple turned to Clara, her smile kind. Clara, your notebook was the key, showing Grayson's presence and Evelyn's suspicions. You were afraid, but you did right to share it. You heard their argument, saw the chart, and noted falsified, a word that sealed his guilt. Clara's eyes welled, but she nodded, clutching her apron. I just wanted to help her, after she was gone. Finally, Miss Marple addressed Lillian, her tone gentle but firm. Mrs. Ward, you came seeking money, didn't you? Your debts, your brooch, they tell a story of need. You argued with Evelyn, left by 10, but lingered nearby, seeing Grayson. At the office door, you didn't kill her, but you kept silent, fearing blame. Lillian's composure cracked, her voice low. I needed her help, but she refused. I saw Grayson, yes, but I thought it was nothing. I should have spoken sooner, but I was ashamed. Crane, his notebook now filled, stood. That's enough. Miss Marple. Grayson, you're under arrest for the murder of Evelyn Carter. Reed escorted the sobbing man out, while Price, Clara, and Lillian remained, their faces a mix of relief and shame. As the hall emptied, Crane approached Miss Marple, his expression a blend of admiration and exasperation. You've a way of seeing through people, Miss Marple. That filing cabinet locksmith opened it yesterday, found Evelyn's notes, confirming Grayson's fraud. You were right about it all. Miss Marple smiled, tucking her knitting away. People are like my knitting, Inspector. Pull the right thread, and the pattern appears. Evelyn was too good to be forgotten. Back at Lilac Cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her cat purring at her feet. She resumed her knitting, the soft click of needles a counterpoint to her thoughts. Grayson's confession had closed the case, but the echoes of human weakness, fear, silence lingered. Secrets, she said to the cat, are dangerous things, but truth is a patient hunter. In St. Mary Mead, where every heart held a story, Miss Marple knew the village would heal, its quiet rhythms restored, until the next thread needed pulling.